Well, good morning. We're picking up in Daniel chapter 4, verses 34 and 35. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. And all the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. And he does according to his will among the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" Revelation of the glory of God has finally come to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's conversion has happened. Just a short while back, we saw Nebuchadnezzar standing on the roof of his palace, so enamored with all his achievements, so impressed with himself. God saying, "I'm going to have to humble you." And ultimately, this moment where out of, in that sense, abject poverty, this man who was more influential than any person in the world, who'd become like an animal, suddenly awakes to see who God really is. And it's interesting the way he describes it. He says, "I looked to heaven, my reason returned, and I blessed the Most High." I looked to heaven, my reason returned, and I blessed the Most High. I looked to heaven. For the first time, Nebuchadnezzar looks beyond and above himself. No longer impressed with himself. Or maybe on the other hand, no longer broken or concerned about the state of his life as he's been humbled. These two things suddenly are no longer his focus, but God is his focus. And as God comes into focus, as he turns his gaze away from himself and onto God, reason returns. And as he sees God and reason returns, he just begins to worship. And what is so fascinating about what he says is that what he goes on to speak about is how other God is from him. So just a few verses back, he was proclaiming his own glory, how he was more powerful than anyone else. Now he says, but this God, his dominion is forever. He rules from generation to generation to generation. I'm finite. I'm so limited in comparison to him. Finally, Nebuchadnezzar has seen himself in the light of God. And that is a critical thing for you and for me. Not only once in our lives, not in that moment of conversion, but day after day after day, that we lift our gaze from ourselves, from the things that trouble us, that concern us, the anxieties, the fears, any sense of guilt from the past, that we lift our eyes to him, the one who heals us, the one who saves us, the one who provides for us, the one who is our protection, the one who deals with our guilt and shame. That we turn our eyes from being impressed by ourselves and we become truly impressed with who he is. And in that place, we find that our perspective on life changes and we step into all that God really has for us. And it's so interesting if you think about Nebuchadnezzar, this man that God had assigned rulership over this mighty empire. In that sense, to be a bringer of justice, a provider for the poor, one who would rule and represent God. Actually, what he did was he drew it all to himself, made it all about himself. But now God restores him back to rule as God's representative. He's found his eyes opened to a new reality. And now, in that sense, Nebuchadnezzar for the first time becomes a glory reflector. And that's what God has for you and me, for our lives. He wants us to be glory reflectors. He wants us to be ambassadors, representatives of Him wherever we are, in our workplaces, in our homes, in our communities, in the world around us. God has this mighty calling on our lives. But we will never see that worked out until we have looked to Him and received His perspective, received understanding from Him, and begun to worship Him. It flows from that we begin to be glory reflectors. And so God has something for you today in terms of reflecting His glory. But today He wants to get your gaze above yourself, above your circumstances, onto Him. He wants to shine brightly onto you, that you might reflect that wherever you are and whoever you're with. The Lord be with you today as you reflect His glory. Just take a few moments to consider these things, to wonder at His sovereignty, to be amazed at how everlasting and unlimited He is in comparison to you, and step into what He has for you today. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in a few days' time.